Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the podcast series from CSC. My name is Katie Simmons and I am the Primary STEM Development Officer. In this podcast, I am joined by 3 teachers from our region, Rhys Beynon, Andrew Parker and Katie Simmons. In this episode, we are going to discuss how teaching and learning in and across the STEM disciplines can be stimulated through literature. Welcome all, thank you for joining me today. Rhys, you teach in Trowbridge Primary School and Andrew, you teach in Greenway Primary School, which together make up the Oaks Federation in the east of Cardiff. I know that you have been developing mathematical reasoning skills using texts across the Federation. So what inspired you to take on this teaching approach?
It came up through a part of our SIG group a few years ago. The focus was on numerical reasoning, as it was one of the areas in our Estin report that we had to work on. So we used it with a cluster of schools to work on certain things, and the reasoning text came through that, and mainly used as a stimuli to help build and enhance reasoning skills in a new way. Our children have always had problems decoding the maths in a real life context or word problems. So this brought an opportunity forward for us to try teacher reasoning in an exciting and in a different way. The decision to use this through out the school, and we're using it from nursery to year 6, and has allowed teachers to use a bit of imagination and take ideas in different ways, then sharing the text across the Federation as well, which allowed a range of fantastic ideas to be shared and a bank of resources to be created for future use.
Yeah, and I guess we also kind of just wanted to try and a new way of teaching maths, and obviously in particular the reasoning aspect, and we kind of had to think outside the box just to enhance the learning experience, and like Andrew said, by using the text right throughout the school, it helps learners develop their reasoning and problem solving skills, and particularly useful for those younger children because they start developing those skills at an early age, which they can then develop more with every text. We wanted to think of a way of engaging those learners who have negative perceptions of maths and kind of boost their confidence a bit. And when I attended the SIG group meetings, I was like kind of instantly excited by teaching maths in this way, and I knew it would have a really positive benefit throughout the school.
That all sounds really interesting. So how did you begin to implement this approach of using text to explicitly teach mathematical reasoning then?
To begin with, it was very, very slow. It's quite difficult sometimes to get everybody on board with a new thing, especially when you're trying to contribute to a whole school approach. Some might think that it's a little bit silly, a little bit childish. So it's trying to kind of pass the knowledge that we kind of found out through the insets that we had and the meetings we've had with other schools to implement it. As maths leaders, we read through the text ourselves. We looked at possible approaches. And it's kind of a way that different years could target different skills that they may not have been able to do yet. So they're not kind of crossing over old ground. We then sent the text out to the teachers along with a form to say what area of math they would be doing. So we knew there was nothing overlapping. Also by doing it by this way and by giving the ideas, teachers weren't starting blind. The plan originally, when we first started, was to read the whole text through an assembly. So we were reading the book to the whole school, which then allowed them the teachers to go back into their class and maybe take in a part of the text which was relevant to their class, so they didn't have to read the story again, considering some of the texts are quite long. To give the children a bit of a boost, we would teach the skill needed for the reasoning throughout the maths, which would then lead into the numerical reasoning needed with the text. And then we could then focus especially on the reason aspect, which obviously with this was the most important factor.
It was definitely slow to start, but what was good about the text that we chose is there were lots of opportunities to use and develop a range of mathematics skills, and then we were then able to link the text to these skills in quite an open and broad way. Across the Federation, we kind of met as teachers and we bounced ideas off each other, and we ended up with a range of meaningful, purposeful and progressive reasoning activities throughout the school, which is all based on one text, which I think is a really good thing to do.
Can you share some examples of such activities and the benefits or impacts you've seen from this approach?
Yeah. When we do these weeks, we've been able, throughout the time that we've done now, to build quite a bit of a library of these books. So we've been able to do it in such a way that Greenway uses one text and Trowbridge teach another text. So then when the next comes up, we're able to swap with our counterpart of the different years. So I was able to swap with the year 6 teacher. And by that way as well, we're able to share good practice. So, for example, in Greenway, we would teach a book, which we're going to talk more about, called Ship-Shaped. And then with Rhys.
Yeah, we looked at a book most recently called Alien Odd and Alien Even, where obviously the main focus was odd and even numbers, which means you can do so much with that. So it was quite broad, quite open. So it was nice that we could see the progression throughout the school with the text as well. And the books that we chose were kind of ideal, as they say what they are on the tin. Both are quite simple books, and they're appropriate for all year groups. For Alien Odd and Alien Even, for example, foundation phase classes kind of focused on stuff like number recognition, sequencing, missing numbers, that kind of thing, whereas Key Stage 2 looked more at odd and even investigations, what happens if you add an odd and an odd number together, even and even, that kind of rule. We looked at some word problems, we did things like number circles, and we explored games such as tic-tac-toe and those kind of fun little activities that you can do. And then we put the activities from the week on display in the corridor in the schools, and it shows work from all the classes as well. So it was really nice to see that.
Yeah, as Rhys said, I think the display is quite a big thing because it's kind of pride of place in the corridors. So any visitors that walk past, they walk in past and they're seeing the whole school have taken part in this kind of adventure in this book to really boost their maths. Whereas we did Ship-Shaped, as I mentioned earlier, and we did activities such as, obviously the name, as Rhys said, gives away shape. So year 6 focused on things like symmetry. Year 5 did lines of symmetry. Year 4 looked at 3D shapes, and they looked at 3D shapes then and how they could build different structures as they saw with the ships. And then it goes down to even as far as nursery and reception, where they didn't really get the work on paper because they're so young. But what they were able to do was they were able to manipulate the shapes of their own that they were able to see in the book and create different shapes that they hadn't seen in the books, which really fire in their imagination. And we normally associate books with literacy, but obviously with this, it's taken in a new way and mixing skills. So the big boost I think we found in both schools is how they were able to use their imagination and really given a boost of maths can be done in a different way. And especially those who struggle with the area, they're able to look at it now in a new way and say, oh, do you know what? I can actually do this. And I've really enjoyed learning about maths and using my skills in a range of different ways.
And it was different to what we normally do as well, because it's very rare that, particularly in our schools anyway, reception aren't looking at the same kind of book as year 6, but we're doing completely different activities. And it was quite nice for us as teachers to kind of be really open-minded and kind of make some sort of link to the text as well, which is maybe something that we haven't done enough of. So that was quite nice exploring that route as well.
That's fantastic. It sounds like this approach has been really powerful for you. Katie, if I can come to you, you were teaching in Ysgol Pen y Garth in the Vale of Glamorgan and have taken a different approach where you stimulated teaching and learning for STEM projects with storybooks. Can you explain how you have done this for us?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, Sarah. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm a science coordinator at Welsh Primary School, and we have just begun, unlike Rhys and Andrew, it's just the beginning for us as a school to try and install and introduce storytelling and storybooks whilst teaching STEM activities. So personally, with science as my subject, I'm always looking for scientific opportunities where the children can get involved in fun, short, sharp lessons where there's lots of STEM coming through it. I mean, storybooks have been around forever, haven't they? And you cannot beat a good story. So, I mean, for me, as soon as we've chosen that text, it's all about getting the children on board. And through doing that, personally, in year 2, I've got a lovely, lively bunch of children that they think books are fantastic, and we treat them with respect. So what we would do in the past, I've had the magic bookshelf where each week there'll be a new book introduced onto the shelf, and we unveil the book and to the children, which is hidden behind a black cloak, and they're very excited with that. But not just putting the book on the shelf, we'll put various objects and pictures that might be linked to the story. So from the Monday, it's straight away getting those children's interest because they're finding these things on the shelf, and then we'll introduce the storybook by the Friday. So what I tend to do then is they've got an idea of what the story is, they can see the title, and I'll just send a brief extract home with the children, and they go through that with their parents over the weekend. I mean, that can be a Google Classroom task that we would send home, or just a printed out text extract that we ask them to chat with mum and dad at home or any guardians, and just have a think about what the story could be talking about. So what we found is that children love having a resource to work with. It's not a blank piece of paper. No child likes opening their book to just seeing lines. They don't know where to begin. So giving them this story, they read it, we read it as a class, we read it individually, we'll film each other reading it, we'll act it out, various different things to really get grasp and a good understanding of what the text is all about. And then we discuss as a class. My children are very independent and inquisitive, and this is what we want in our learners. They will often say to me, ask what the meaning of the word is, or we'll use a thesaurus in our everyday learning, and then we'll talk about what opportunities arise from the book. So that can be anything. It's not just language. It can be something maths that's arisen from it, ordering skills or adding up or money or going shopping or anything. And then I will then mainly focus on a STEM activity based around that storybook.
How have your pupils responded to this teaching approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking to pupils and having taught for a long time, lots of teachers and pupils actually, when I'm asked them about science, science is boring, and that really annoys me because science is amazing. Science is so much fun. Science can be the best subject because you get to experiment, you get to make a mess, you get to run around and be really silly. So it's my job within the school to try and give encouragement to staff just to be confident, and you've got the storybook. Think of a STEM activity linked with it and let the children go with it. Let them make a mess, let them experiment. So as I've mentioned, my class are really enthusiastic, and a recent example was a really famous storybook, for example, Jack and the Beanstalk, which is available in Welsh, and we used that literally for 2 weeks of work. So our language came into that, our maths came into that, measuring height, and then the STEM activity was dropping an egg from a height. And what could we do to protect this golden egg that Jack wants to take back down the beanstalk? So, of course, my lesson starter was dropping a real egg from a real height. And of course, the children thought it was fantastic watching it splatter all over the floor. So we had lots of discussion then about how can we protect this egg? What materials are good for protecting an egg? And they went about it discussing within groups. We fed back as a class. And then I just put on each table an array of different materials. And then they had to design some kind of cover, some kind of pocket, some kind of bag, something that's going to protect this precious egg for when Jack drops it down the beanstalk, that's going to protect it from smashing. So, I mean, without any any kind of prompting, I had a child say, oh, I know, a parachute is really going to protect the egg. And then that leads you off into discussion, a different discussion, forces and things like that. So much can come out of it. And, the children thoroughly enjoyed designing, making, preparing their parachute or their box or whatever they did. And then off we went onto the yard and got the step ladders, and up they went themselves up the ladders and dropped their device to see if the egg was protected or not. And it was just fantastic. So often now in class, children are asking me, how does this work? Why does this happen? I'll say, right, let's tackle that. Let's put it in, let's talk about some answers. Let's set it as a home task. And often enough, they'll go home and the next day they come in with a written explanation of why this works, or they're just so independent and so encouraging, and they love to learn. So certainly having books has helped with that, because you see them at home wanting to read again at bedtime because they've just really got so much out of their story in school.
This is all so positive, isn't it? It's really great. So moving on then to the types of literature you use. Do you focus on fiction or non-fiction, novels, short stories, picture books, those texts that are written purposely for science or mathematics, or are you exploring with a mixture? And which do you feel is the most beneficial to the learning?
Yeah, we thought it was best to kind of use a mixture of texts, especially as the intention is to use text from nursery to year 6. And I think it's also important to kind of note that we digitize the books. So this allows every class to have access to the story at the same time. And then this means the learners get to see the book on like an interactive screen or something like that. And it also means that teachers can make notes on the story, and that may help the learning take place. We could point out where there's certain maths, or we could ask a question based on the picture or something along those lines. So we didn't just want to have one single book, because obviously that would be logistically not very good to share one book around all the classes. So we digitized it, put it on our kind of shared area so teachers could access it as a PowerPoint or a PDF and then do with it as they want.
Yeah, I would kind of, again, like as Rhys said, I think we found that picking a book that's kind of available for all children to be able to access was the most important thing, because there's so many out there. But the important thing is to make sure that nursery children do get the same benefit as a year 6 child. And again, just like what Rhys said, being able to digitize them and put them onto a PowerPoint to give the children having them to give them the ability to actually read the book their own pace and get a closer look at those pictures is vital in their learning, because at a younger age they can't read the words, but by looking at the pictures it's giving them the clues that they need to maybe decode the maths or to bring forward that conversation that they can have in class to really kind of make that learning more real.
Yes, certainly for us in Pen y Garth, we're not as far down the line as Rhys and Andrew at the moment. It is certainly an intention to bring it as a whole school approach. But at the moment, I'm just experimenting with storybooks in year 2. But certainly there's no set fiction or non-fiction texts. It can be just a cartoon book. It can be a newspaper article. We often play a YouTube clip of somebody else reading the story, so they get to hear different accents. And it's just whatever we feel the most relevant text or the relevant book or the relevant story that we can find that's going to fit in with our theme.
I think as well, what was nice about the whole school approach and reading it in the assembly times and stuff was brothers and sisters from different classes were going home and kind of discussing what they did with the story and what their activities were, and that was a really nice thing to see. We heard it, we saw it happen. And it was really nice because you don't get that opportunity very often. So I think the whole school approach really worked for us. And I think I would recommend it to use in the future, to other schools to use in the future.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice as well, because we're talking about the school community. We were even seeing, obviously, siblings going home and speaking to their parents about it. And then when we had open even and things like that, the parents would come in and goes, "Oh, I've heard all about this book you've read called Ship Shapes." And it really shows that what we're doing is worthwhile. So it's a great feeling. And when you hear though that kind of feedback from the wider learning community, it gives you a really good feeling, and it really makes you feel like you've accomplished something.
So, do you feel that there are any limitations to using literature to teach STEM?
Certainly no limits at all. Just go for it and give it a go. And what I found within my classroom environment is even the lower ability learners are really getting involved, because it's not just pressure on one individual. We use it as a whole class approach. So it's really benefited them. The fact that we've chunked up a story and that they can relate to the pictures, they can relate to the characters, and then that's helping them with their writing. So definitely give it a go, and no limits.
I kind of agree with what Katie said. With her, very, very few limitations. I'd say it kind of brushed upon it earlier on. I'd say that the trickiest part was probably finding a text that would be kind of used from aged 3 up until age 11. Because obviously I teach year 6, so when you get a picture book up onto the screen, they think it's a bit babyish, but you've got to kind of work to get them involved. I think maybe a future limitation would be how, because they're set books, how we're going to adapt them to the new curriculum. So we might have to maybe take them off in new directions, and maybe manipulate the plot line to kind of maybe build around our context. But I think that would probably be the only couple.
Yeah, I agree with both what Katie and what Andrew said. One thing for me, I guess, was that we were worried that if we use the same 3 or 4 books every year, the learners wouldn't engage as well, as they kind of get a bit bored and, we did this last year, and they'd feel like they were doing the same thing all the time. So we recently added a new range of books to our library, to our little maths books library as well. So we're not always using the same text, so it's fresh for the learners and they can engage with these texts more. And Andrew was right about finding books that are suitable for all ages, but it ultimately comes down to how we use the text, the activities that we do, and the skills that have been developed.
So, Andrew, you mentioned the curriculum for Wales there, which brings me really nicely into my next question. Now, as we move forward to realise the new curriculum for Wales, how will your reflections on using literature inform your curriculum design for STEM?
I think it's going to be huge. Now we're used to implementing the texts. We don't want to stop. So I just think it's slight little tweaks rather than like whole across the board changes, because if it works, why change? We may have to change a few elements, such as putting the meanings into the books into our context, like I said in the previous questions. But I think as long as they're using those mathematical concepts, those reasoning concepts, then it was kind of, again, like what Katie said earlier on, these books are perfect for the new curriculum. It's giving the children the impetus to really say what they think, and really show their reasoning, if not on paper, verbally to each other, by speaking to each other or speaking to the teacher in whole class discussion, and they can go anywhere you want. So in terms of design, I think it could kind of be a bed in some ways that we can build from and build around that, rather than maybe build up to. So, it's really exciting.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I'm really excited about the new curriculum for Wales. It's absolutely brilliant, and taught in the right way and covering the right skills. It will be great for our learners. I mean, I'm going to just put it out there and say, I think it's probably going to be more a challenge for some individual teachers that maybe struggle with that bit of freedom. So certainly my job is going to be trying to get everybody on board now for a whole school approach with storytelling and the new curriculum. And I've loved listening to Rhys and Andrew's ideas about, I love the school assembly. I think that's fantastic. Or, have a class display involving the wider community, and just looking at pedagogy and how can we introduce, different ways, our different styles of teaching in order to give that full, learning experience to our pupils.
Yeah, well, I think using these texts is definitely a more flexible way of teaching reasoning, and it's definitely something, as Andrew said, that we'll continue to do because it does fit in well with the new curriculum. We tend to set out a week for the whole school to do the activities, but I do believe that the text that we use, they can be adapted, and it'll be up to us as staff to link the text to a context or to our class context or year group context. As Katie said earlier, it also allows for lots of opportunities for pupil voice, which is obviously a big part of the new curriculum. And we have asked learners what maths they could spot in the text, what maths do they want to do from the text. And with this approach, we're moving away from maybe the rigid maths teaching of the past, and we're a lot more free, we're a lot more flexible, and that's perfectly in line with the new curriculum.
And as a final takeaway, I wonder if you could offer any advice for school leaders or individual practitioners that are looking to develop this STEM teaching and learning approach through the use of literature.
Well, I would say absolutely go for it. We have found that it kind of really helps engage the learners, and they really enjoy the books and activities that we do. As I mentioned earlier as well, we found that it really appeals to those who traditionally don't engage or enjoy maths, as they don't necessarily realise that they're doing maths through reading a book. It also develops many skills, such as problem solving, specific numeracy skills, teamwork if they're working in groups, resilience, and also in a literacy side of it, it also develops comprehension skills because they're understanding the text in a kind of new and different way. I think it's great that a year 1 class and a year 5 class can use the same book but have completely different outcomes and activities, and they can go home, they can discuss it, and it's something that they really look forward to.
And
yes, totally like what Rhys said, just go for it. I mean, the key here is to choose an appropriate text. So maybe for the first time, choose a book that you're really familiar with, but has lots of scope in it. I mean, if you work with, lucky enough to work with another colleague or meet as a team, just thrash it out amongst yourselves, go through the book, write down, brainstorm as many ideas that come from that text. And you'll be surprised how many cross-curricular links will be included in a piece of text or in that storybook. And you will get plenty of STEM activities, I'm sure, then through using stories. And children will love it as long as you make it a really exciting way for learning.
And I would just be echoing what both Rhys and Katie have just said. Go for it. There's nothing to lose. It's a new and exciting way of teaching and it's an area that I think a lot of teachers do find tricky to teach. Get the whole school, and in case of our federation involved, it's just an amazing approach, and there's more benefits that outweighs the negatives. So just go for it and promote this area, which is such a big thing in the new curriculum.
Thank you to Rhys and Andrew from the Oaks Federation and Katie from Ysgol Pen y Garth for giving their time so freely to discuss this with us today. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to the channel for all our future episodes and follow us on Twitter at CSC_SciTech.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.